This is Ayani.
And this is Corinne.
And you're listening to Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast where we take a semi-scholarly look at why
and how
the sex stuff in media matters.
In case you haven't noticed, there is a lot going on. Gestures everywhere. So rather than get into anything too tragic, as we're wont to do, we have instead gathered some comfort media for interesting times. That is, the pop culture we turn to when things are rough and we're in need of a boost to help us make it through.
This episode, in the style of our pop culture roundups, we trade off sharing cozy books, music, and TV shows that bolster our spirits and help us feel warm inside.
We'd love to hear about your favorite comfort pop culture, so come tell us about it on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Tumblr at Sex Love Lit Podcast.
And for more cozy vibes and hot takes, don't forget to subscribe to and rate our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms.
All right, grab some tea and a blanket, and let's get cozy.
Hello, SLL listeners. Thank you for joining us for another episode of your favorite pop culture semi-academic podcast. We're always excited to have you here with us to talk more about pop culture and stuff like that. So, Corinne, how are you doing? How is life treating you?
I guess I'm not gonna lie, it's been kind of a rough month.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We are recording this in the month of November, slightly pre-Thanksgiving, but like, I don't know. We are a US-based podcast.
If you couldn't tell by our accents.
And, regular references to Florida.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, just been the vibes are bad.
Yeah. The thing that's hard is actually, so we're recording on the 17th and my birthday is coming up this week, which is always super exciting for me. But like, I've been trying to mentally get the vibes in like my birthday vibe place. Like usually I'm hype all month and, just haven't been able to muster that. And also I will say there is stuff happening socially, right? Countrywide. But also I have managed once again, like a fool, to pack the last 3 months of the year with like so much stuff that I'm a little tired. I'm a little like,
yeah.
I just want to go in a room and be quiet for a week. She says while she records a podcast, but like you get where I'm coming from.
I do.
Teaching with Saw. October, I had like 4 or 5 different deadlines of different kinds, and now I'm working on editing essays for an edited collection. So, I don't know.
So not only are the general like political vibes bad, your personal life is chock full of shit.
Yes, and
no, not bad things,
yeah,
busy things.
I was like, some of this shit is good shit. Like when you eat all your vegetables, but like it's a lot. It's a lot. So I'm kind of tired, which is why when you suggested doing this particular kind of episode, I was like, oh, yes, that sounds healing and comforting and lovely.
Yeah, so for some context,
it's your job.
And instead of doing our sort of regular deep dive or like, I don't know, a more like analysis kind of podcast, what we're actually going to focus this episode on is what we are calling comfort media for interesting times. So what that means is we're basically just going to talk about some of our favorite things. So the kind of media you turn to when things are bad and you need to like sort of like shore up.
Rally.
Yeah, you need to rally. You need to like gird your loins. I don't know.
No, it's funny. I use gird your loins all the time. So like, I just wasn't expecting it.
Yeah. We will start with our sort of regular What's Sparking Joy, but cozy edition, and then we're going to share some of our favorite media that we turn to when we need a lift.
We need some cozy, as it were. Corinne, do we want to tell them what Sparking Joy is?
Yeah, might as well.
Okay.
So tangent, but I am having my students do a podcast episode for their final assignment right now, and I was teaching them storyboarding by just like drawing boxes on the board of what a regular episode looks like for us. And one of the boxes was What's Sparking Joy, which includes the intro and the intro music to the segment.
Very true, which maybe I'll start like right about now. We'll start some music here.
But all right, so What's Sparking Joy is when we talk about something we are currently watching, reading, or listening to that is currently sparking joy for us. And sometimes what we share here is, especially for me, tends towards the tragic, but no tragedy here.
No, not today.
Just cozy vibes. So Ayani, what is sparking cozy joy for you right now?
Yeah, so what's sparking cozy joy for me is the Blue Box anime, which is running on Netflix right now. Blue Box is an adaptation of the manga by Miura Koji. Andrew is a big fan of this romance high school story that he's been wanting me to read for a very long time. He actually bought me like the first book or two for Christmas one year, and I did read them, and I like them a lot. But the anime just dropped this season, and it has been such a delightful watch because it is 100% a romance story. Super quick synopsis. It's set in a private high school in Japan that is well known for like its athletic programs. And the story centers around Taiki, who plays badminton, and the girl he has a crush on, Chinatsu, who's a basketball player. And what the conceit is that Chinatsu's family is moving to somewhere that is not Japan. They're like leaving the country. And because Chinatsu's mother and Taiki's mother were old school basketball mates at high school, Chinatsu ends up living with them while she's finishing high school. So for the next like year or two, right? And of course, these two youngsters have a crush on each other. So like hijinks ensue, but in a sweet way. Like it's not a comedy. It is very much centered in the kind of precious, delicate feelings of loving somebody for the first time. And a lot of the, let's just say, stereotypical romance foibles kind of a thing, like misunderstandings and stuff, they all get wrapped up pretty quickly and satisfyingly in a way that does not draw out that, you know, stuff for fake drama, let's say. So, of course, things are going to get dramatic later as the show goes on, but I think it's really doing a smart job of how it's playing with this kind of romance because so far, right, I'm only like 7 episodes in, but the characters are likable, they're sweet, they're interesting, their interactions are fun, and it's just, I don't know, I'm just rooting for kids. I'm rooting for the babies, and it's giving me joy. It's warming my heart. And also the opening is fantastic. Like I'm obsessed with it. It's by I think the name of the band is Official Hige Dandism, which means like manly mustache. Like it's official manly mustache. It's really funny. I was looking it up because I was like, what does this mean? And the song is called something blue, maybe like stone blue, deep blue. I'll look it up. I'll put it in the show notes. But I really like it. It gives me good vibes. So like all around, Blue Box, highly recommend, especially if you like romance, if you like anime. It's not tragic. So like it's not like My Happy Marriage, which like I cried a lot for a lot of different reasons. So yeah.
So some cozy anime for Ayani.
Yeah. What's going on for you? What's your current coz, Corinne? Haha, Triple C.
So I have somehow started to read again. I think that sort of like shadow of post-dissertation literature PhD student unable to read is finally lifting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been about a year and a half. So
that was exactly my timeline. Yeah.
So right on schedule, really. But one of the books that I read that I really liked, which I am like slightly late to, like I bought it like a year and a half ago and have only just read it. But it's called Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. And it is a delightful, cozy fantasy book where I think it says like in the blurb for it that it's like the stakes are small, but like I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's like a very small stakes, but very sort of heartwarming story. So the main character is an orc named Viv, who would like to retire from being a mercenary and open a coffee shop.
Full support. Oh my god. Academic adjacent life right there.
Yeah, so like the whole book is basically her being like, well, I would like to abandon my mercenary ways and where a fight is the answer to every question and instead serve this delicacy that no one has heard of called coffee in this town. And it's like her journey to like get the coffee shop going. She also meets a bunch of other really fun characters that, you know, your regular sort of like Dungeons and Dragon-y kind of fantasy creatures, but it's like when they're not questing, when they're just like living their lives.
Full support.
And it's really nice. It also like is a little bit sapphic, so that ticks it up a notch for me. And yeah, it was just like a nice cozy read.
And coffee was involved, which like makes it.
And coffee was.
Yeah.
One of the things about it, actually, because she ends up also getting like a baker, and I'll save the details, but like there are a lot of really delicious sounding descriptions, particularly of cinnamon rolls.
Oh.
And I have not yet found a cinnamon roll place in Georgia, in Atlanta, where I live now. And I had a cinnamon roll place in Gainesville, Florida, and like I want a cinnamon roll.
So it sounds like we're disappointed by the fact that there are not recipes in the back of this book.
Yeah.
Well, when you come visit, we'll get some cinnamon rolls. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
Yeah. Oh, well, excellent. That was like such a nice, soft, sparking joy, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I'm now intrigued by legends and lattes, and also would absolutely patronize a coffee shop run by an orc. 100%.
Oh yeah, it was delightful.
So for the main content of our episode, while our What's Sparking Joy was looking more at current things that we're going through, we were thinking we would sit with different pieces of media that like make us feel warm inside. But really thinking about ones that have been with us for quite some time. So not necessarily the thing that we watched or read last week, but digging back in our own personal histories, right? And
yeah, the things we go back to.
Especially when we're looking for something to give us some warmth. I guess I'll kick us off since Corinne rounded out What's Sparking Joy with my first throwback cozy, which admittedly is not that far of a throwback, but I'll give a little bit of context. So the first thing I want to talk about is On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden. It's a graphic novel that came out in 2018, so more than 5 years ago, but, you know, still kind of recent. And the reason that I'm bringing up On a Sunbeam is that this is actually a book that I think was a Christmas gift, if I'm remembering correctly. Andrew got this for me for Christmas. And to give a little bit about the story, it's a fantasy that is using the trappings and kind of dressings of science fiction. It takes place in space, but like the spaceship are fish, and there are floating like high schools. And the story is about a young woman who, for a variety of reasons, doesn't really know what her future is going to be like in high school. And she gets set up with a group of women and non-binary folks who prepare space ruins to be turned into different kinds of buildings, office buildings, museums, all that kind of stuff. But what the story is really about is about her relationship with this young woman that she went to school with and, you know, kind of fell in love with, but then due to kind of tragic circumstances, they were separated by space. So it is a coming of age story. It plays a lot with time. We look at stuff in the present, but then there are also chapters that look back to their like school lives as freshmen in this floating girls' high school. Like, you know, it's in space and space stuff is happening, but also it's very much, I think, a fantasy in a lot of ways. And I just, part of the reason that I keep coming back to it is one, I teach it every year in Modern Comics Exploration, the class I do with Saw. And because it is so centered in feelings and emotions, a lot of it is just really thinking about what it means to take care of each other and what it means to love each other as people. And that in a lot of ways is just really beautiful to me, right? I think it's also the fact that it's like a fantasy, but not a big, heavy world building fantasy, right? They don't explain why the spaceships are fish. It's just vibes. The spaceships are fish, okay? Like, why is there high school in space? I don't fucking know, but it doesn't matter. It's just kind of a story that the vibes are really good. And every time I come back to it, I'm still very compelled by the characters and by how much they care about each other and come to care about each other. And it's beautiful. It's stunning. Yeah, I'll pause because I feel like I'm just prattling on and on about On a Sunbeam. But like, I highly recommend it. Tillie Walden is an excellent cartoon. Have you read any of her work?
I tried to read On a Sunbeam, I think like a year ago, but I was still not literate at that time.
Ah, fair.
So
it is a chunker, even though it's a graphic novel.
Yeah. I need to try again now that I am recalling how to read.
And Tillie Walden has published a lot of stuff. She's a relatively young cartoonist too. She's kind of prolific for someone at this stage in her career. I met her at Comic-Con. Did I tell you this?
Yeah, I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, completely randomly. It was really nice. I freaked out. You know. But she's published a lot of different things. Like she's also done Spinning, which is sitting right next to me. But I think that one's a little bit more of an emotional lift because I think it's a memoir of how she used to dance, but then there was an accident.
So a little bit less cozy then.
A little bit less cozy. And I haven't read it yet, so I can't really tell you. But I do highly recommend On a Sunbeam, especially if you can get past like the need to know everything about what is happening in the world. If you can just ride the vibes and be like, sure, we're remodeling space ruins, and sure, space travel by fish is possible. And if you just kind of really sit in with the character emotions and all of that, it's a really good read.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, what do you got for us first, Corinne?
All right, so I am throwing it back a lot further than Aoni to a book that came out before I was born.
A tax because it came out the year I was born, but you know.
But that is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, and it came out in 1986. I expect at least some listeners probably are familiar with it, or maybe more familiar with the Miyazaki film adaptation of Howl's Moving Castle. But specifically, I'm talking about the book here because Diana Wynne Jones is one of my very, very favorite children's lit authors. She writes a lot of really, really clever fantasy where there is always some sort of like twist or reveal that when you go back and read it again, it's like, oh, of course, this totally makes sense. But it's always just like so clever and surprising, and her books are just always such a pleasure to read. But one of my very favorite is Howl's Moving Castle, which is about so it's set in the fantasy land of Ingary, and it is about Sophie, who works in a hat shop and feels that nothing interesting will ever happen to her because she's the eldest of three and nothing ever happens to the oldest of three.
Oh, that's you.
That is me. Actually, when I read this for the first time, I think in 2013, the year I graduated from undergrad, and read it. It was like, Sophie feels like me. This is unsettling.
It's wild, actually. That means we read it around the same time for the first time. But go on.
Yeah, but she's much more Corinne in her 20s than Corinne in her 30s, where I am now.
Fair.
But so Sophie works in the hat shop. She thinks nothing will ever happen to her. She doesn't do anything, and she becomes sort of like a shut-in because she becomes so like agoraphobic almost.
Oh, poor Soph.
But then she somehow, I don't want to spoil things, but she somehow ends up with beef with the Witch of the Waste, who comes and curses her with old age and turns Sophie into like a 90-year-old woman. And Sophie's like, well, I guess if I'm old, I might as well go adventuring now, I guess. So that is what prompts her to leave the hat shop, and she comes across the wizard Howl, who lives in a moving castle and who there are horrible rumors about that he like eats young girls' hearts and is scary. And then Howl ends up being one of the best characters that I've ever encountered in literature.
So he does eat young girls' hearts, but just not in the way that they mean.
Yeah. There are a lot of it's one of those books where like I don't want to spoil too much because everything ends up being like very clever and very wink wink nudge nudge.
It's funny. I'm like, this book is almost 38 years old. I don't know.
I know, but also like if you're going into it and haven't read it before.
Okay.
But so
right.
I will say for people who have seen the film but not read the book.
Oh, it's different.
The film sort of plays Howl and Sophie straight up as like romantic hero and heroine, where like Howl is like this dashing princely figure and I don't know, all of that. And then Sophie is like very much like damsel in distress, but who like has like a, I don't know, an iron core or whatever. But like in the book, Howl is A, kind of a fuckboy, and B, is always trying to slither out of his responsibilities.
Mood.
And then Sophie ends up being like incredibly sassy and very much like, She ends up also being a lot in a different way, and they end up very, very complimentary. But I think now said a lot of words about Howl's Moving Castle. But so a reason that it's very comforting to me is A, I really like Sophie, I really like Howl, I really like their dynamic. I also just really like how clever Diana Wynne Jones is with words, like the way she writes description, the way she writes dialogue is just very, very clever and enjoyable to read. Yeah. Anything I should add, Ayani?
Can I ask if something about the time that you read this book in is comforting to you? Because something I'll talk about in my next Throwback Cozy is the way there's a sense of nostalgia that tinges the thing that I'm talking about. On a Sunbeam is a little too recent for like nostalgia, but I'm curious, like.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I'd read a lot of Diana Wynne Jones before I read Howl's Moving Castle.
Oh,
like,
interesting.
I really like her Chronicles of Crestomancy series. She's extremely prolific. But for some reason, it took me longer to get to Howl's Moving Castle. And I think maybe I read Howl right as I was about to go into like committing to being a children's literature studies person.
Oh, interesting.
So like before I lived in Poland for a year, so like a year before I started grad school.
Okay.
But I think that it is also associated a little bit with like a time that felt very full of like possibility
yeah.
to me. And I think maybe sort of like not the flip side of that exactly, but I think one reason it is a comforting book to me as well is that Sophie feels like she's living in a time and a space with no possibility where she can't see like the other side. She doesn't think there is another side. But then it turns out there's this whole world of possibilities. She has like a lot of power and potential that she didn't know she had that she finds when it feels like the end.
Even as a 90-year-old woman too.
Well, there's a very funny moment where she like, at first when she's cursed, she's like, well, this is much more like I am, so perhaps the Witch of the Waste has done me a favor. But then like a little bit and she's like, wait, this woman has robbed me of like 60 years of life. What the fuck? So she sort of like grows into like, I don't know, like just being able to be more herself because she doesn't feel the constraints of, I don't know, feeling like she has to be a certain way as a young person.
I was going to say being a woman in her 30s, certain kind of constraints of that. Okay. Interesting. No, that's good. It is a good read.
Yeah, that just highly recommend for anyone who has missed it somehow. All right, what is next for you, Ayani?
Next for me, we're going someplace completely different. So far in our cozy conversation, I've talked about anime, I've talked about a graphic novel, and now I'm going to talk about music. So if you haven't gotten this sense over the course of the podcast, right? Like if this is the first time you've ever listened to the show and you have no idea who I am, I love music. I come from a very musical family, even though I am not myself a musician. And music, in a lot of ways, kind of builds the scaffolding for my life. A lot of how I think about different points in my Ayani existence, there's music that kind of accompanies that. And I think perhaps being steps away from my 38th birthday, I'm feeling a little bit retrospective, right? And thinking about the journey to get here. So the things that are falling in my cozy bucket number 2 are 2 discographies of artists that I've been listening to for a very, very long time. Maaya Sakamoto and Hikaru Utada, who are both, I guess, J-pop artists. Let's just say they're Japanese singers, musicians. And I've been listening to both of them pretty much since I started listening to Japanese music when I was like 12 or 13. So part of the reason that these are cozy artists for me is because they've, in a way, structured kind of like parts of my life. So when I go back and listen to either like all of their discography that I have or certain albums, it reminds me kind of these certain moments in my life. And in a way, kind of like what you were talking about with Howl's Moving Castle, like points of possibility, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So for Maaya Sakamoto, the 2 albums that like I often come back to are Shounen Alice and her singles collection, both from 2003. So these were albums that I grabbed less than legally, let's say, when I was in high school going into college. And when I listen to them, I'm reminded a lot of like how I felt about life when I was like 18, 17, 16. And obviously I'm not that same person anymore, but there was a way that, I don't know, the songs made me think of like the fantasy of being alive in a way. Like it kind of got those creative juices going. So in a way that kind of felt like I was transported to a different kind of world when I was listening to them. And they still, in a way, access that part of me. So I did listen to Shounen Alice a lot when I was like working on my dissertation because it gave me that sense of like possibility and creativity and, you know, there's something of value in me to put out into the rest of the world. And it just kind of makes me think a lot about that phase in life. And they're also good to listen to when it's raining. Like, it's good. Like, when it's raining outside, I'm like, it's time to listen to Maaya Sakamoto to give me a hug on the inside. And she's done a lot of work since, of course, her albums in 2003, right? But I know these 2 in particular just were something that meant a lot to me at that phase in my life. I walked around campus, like, in the snow listening to these albums. So it just kind of really recalls that for me. And then with Utada,
her, I knew you had a lot of fondness for.
Yeah. So literally, I want to say like either the first or second song I ever downloaded back in the days, the Wild West of music theft, was her single "Moving On Without You," which was from "Moving On Without You." I think was from her first album. Now my old brain is forgetting.
Time is a construct. It's fine.
But anyhow, so like my relationship with Utada has literally been for like the last, oh my God, how old? So 25 years, maybe longer than that. Like Jesus. I love this person's work. So Utada has a habit of dropping albums at moments in my life that feel kind of like big things are going to happen. Right. So, you know, when I first started getting into Japanese music and was like figuring out who I was as a person, like teenagerhood is weird, right? And so there were albums that really meant a lot to me there. And then in 2006, she dropped Ultra Blue. And I graduated from college in 2008, but I think I got Ultra Blue like 2007. So it was very much wrapped up in that kind of phase of my existence. Like not the beginning phase where I'm like a baby on campus and I'm like, oh God, what is life? But towards the end where, you know, I'm more of a young adult, you know, I don't know what the next step is for me. But Utada was like, here you go. I have an album for you. And I was like, oh, thank you. I needed this. And so that to me kind of, again, is a balm for the soul going back and listening to that album, especially because genre-wise, they were really reaching into something that was different from some of the other music that they had done. Like Utada pulls a lot on R&B in a lot of their work, and this one was kind of a little bit more experimental, right? It wasn't like electronic, but was playing a lot with like electronic sounds, and some of it was slower, some of it was it was just different vibes, and I really appreciated that exploration. And then Utada went on hiatus for quite some time and then started putting out music again when I was in graduate school. So, support. But they came out with an album again while I was finishing up my dissertation in 2022 called Bad Mode. And though I've had such a long relationship with this artist, Bad Mode is like become one of my favorite albums that she's put out. And I think it's wild for someone who has such an extensive discography to still be reinventing themselves and playing around with music and trying new things. And so, yeah, when I'm in a certain headspace, sometimes I'll just put on the Utada discography. And in particular, like, I'll loop Bad Mode a lot, and I'll loop songs from Ultra Blue a lot just because of what they mean to me, right?
Yeah, and the vibes that they bring.
Yeah.
Or channel for you, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So, I know not quite a book, not quite a piece of storytelling. Well, music is storytelling, but like in a different kind of way. Especially since, I don't always understand what is being said. I've looked up lyrics before, but like it was a different internet in 2004, I just vibed.
It was.
Yeah. Anything I should bring up about those since you asked me that question? Or, yeah.
I don't know if I have any other questions about it, but I will say one of the few Japanese dramas I've watched called First Love, I think is based on an Utada song.
Yeah. First Love was her first Japanese album, which also, watching an artist grow, like from their first album to their last or their most recent, is quite an experience. And it's really different from what she's doing now, but also special in a lot of ways. And I say her first Japanese album because she put out an album when she was like a baby in the US that didn't really take off. But yeah, she's been making music for a really long time. I think her father was a music producer, I think, and did a lot of work with both American and Japanese artists. So her first album, she was like 13 when she put it out.
Oh wow, so a baby.
Yeah. And I don't even own it. I just have one song from it, and it's adorable because it's like this 90s style R&B track, and she's just singing her little heart out. But yeah, so that drama is based on First Love, and I think she did a re-release when the drama came out.
I enjoyed the drama a lot. You haven't seen it, right?
Mm-mm.
I watched it because Andrew, Ayani's spouse, told me to watch it, and then I ended up liking it much more than he did. But yeah, the soundtrack to that. So this is not my second cozy thing, but I will say the soundtrack to that is something that I play in the background when I'm like working on something a lot, because like the instrumental soundtrack is really, really lovely.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll listen to that then. All right, back to you, buddy. What's your second one?
All right, so I am apparently this episode just gonna talk about books.
We're really being weird today.
Yeah, instead of bringing up a K-drama or a C-drama, which like I thought about, but like those are relatively sort of recent media for me.
You also brought up a J-drama and not a C-drama or a K-drama.
Who am I?
I don't know. Now I'm worried. Like, doppelganger.
Oh, man. But anyway, so what I'm going to bring up is the 5 romance books by Eva Ibbotson, who is known in part as a children's fantasy author, who I always thought of in sort of the same class as Diana Wynne Jones, except her fantasy was often a little bit weirder and a little bit spookier.
Ooh.
So it didn't always work for me because I'm not great with stuff that's spooky. But she has these 5 romance books that were re-released around the time I was in high school, instead of as adult literature, as young adult literature.
Oh, interesting.
That are all set in Europe in like the early 1900s. So there's one that really is like the 1900s and 1910s. Oh, actually, that one's set in South America. My bad.
Oh.
But it is about like a colony in ways that are like interesting. But the other ones are set in like in England, in Austria, a little bit in Russia sometimes. But Eva Ibbotson was Austrian and was a refugee who immigrated to the UK or to England, I believe, in the 30s.
Oh, interesting.
So all of these 5 books are about these 5 young women who are living in what I think I would also call interesting times in different ways. And they're these sort of lovely romance novels that are a little bit like Downton Abbey style, a little bit sometimes like upstairs, downstairs.
Okay.
Very much like with the aristocracy kind of. But my 2 favorites that I will mention specifically are The Reluctant Heiress, which was published in 1982.
Oh, before both of us.
It's set in Vienna post-World War I and is about a young countess named Tessa who, you know, Austria was a fraught time to be post-World War I because it's after, like, Austrian-Hungarian Empire had been dissolved and it was, like, very unclear what was going to happen to the aristocracy. So, like, Tessa isn't really sure if she can... Like, she's the heiress to, like, this big castle, this, like, big estate, and basically has to sell it off because she can't support it anymore with, like, the money that she has, which is still a lot of money, but not enough without, like, you know, an empire that she's part of. So she basically disguises herself and starts working at an opera company because she loves music and wants to support music. And, like, and she's, like, a staunch... She's also a staunch communist. It was like for like the dissolution of like the aristocracy. It's so funny. She's like this hilarious character, like ideologically. But it ends up being a romance with her and an English. Oh, I think he's an earl. I can't remember. I don't remember all the titles here. But who like. No, actually, he's not an earl. He just has a lot of money and has refused to, like, have a title conferred upon him because he, like, was an orphan and then, like, whatever. But anyway, he ends up buying her castle as a place to propose to his first love, who he eventually finds out is a terrible person. But along the way, hires Tessa's opera... Not Tessa's opera company. The opera company where Tess works.
Yeah.
As, like, part of this whole, like, engagement party situation.
Oh.
And it's really lovely. I really love the way Eva Ibbotson writes settings. That's one of the books that I think made me first fall in love with Vienna as a city.
So not to interrupt you, but when you say the way she writes settings, is it, like, how she's describing the city? Is it how the city is, like, a part of the story? Like, what is it that's...
Kind of both.
Okay.
Because she has a really big vocabulary, which is like a weird thing to say, but like when I was reading them, I think in high school, they were the first books in a while I remember reading and being like, oh, I have to look up words. I don't know all of these. But she also just like, I think was herself a little bit nostalgic for like post-war Vienna.
Okay.
And that sort of comes through like this idea of Vienna as like this very like romantic city that's like the birthplace of a lot of different music, and it's also at the same time very like personable, and that it's not just like, oh, like this is where Mozart did great stuff or whatever. It's also specifically like, and this is where like this person related, like Mozart's housekeeper like fed the ducks, like
okay. That sounds lovely, actually. So kind of grounded in the lived people of Vienna, right?
Yeah. Well, and like I think that is why Tessa as a main character is also very interesting, because it's not like Tessa wants to be an opera singer. Tessa just wants to work to support music.
I mean, vibes. I get that.
So like which was like a relationship I really liked. And then the other one I'll mention really briefly because I think waxed eloquent about this a lot. It's called A Countess Below Stairs, and this one is set post-Russian Revolution, and it is about Anna, who is a Russian countess who now, you know, fled Russia during the revolution because it was a bad time to be part of the aristocracy in Russia.
Understatement, yeah.
So she goes to England and then ends up getting a job as a servant at an English estate where romance again ensues. But she also has like, she loves the ballet. So that there's like like across all of these romance books, they're set in these times where like these young women are like having a rough go. Like their world in some ways has ended, but they like continue on and are nonetheless very like often very optimistic, often very hopeful, and then also love the arts.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to say in all of them, I mean, less so Howl's Moving Castle, but in everything else you've talked today, people have been like, ah, yes, there's this thing I love, and now I'm going to do something related to this thing, be it coffee or the opera. I'm sure there's some ballet that works its way into A Countess Below Stairs. Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The Russian ballet makes an appearance.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. So I find it very interesting that your cozy reads are all like, I'm going to stop doing this thing and go follow my dream, in a sense. So I'm not going to say what that says about you and your life right now, but you know.
Also, like, around the time when I was reading these and they were, like, became sort of solidified as comfort reads, that was also when I was switching from engineering to doing English grad school.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if it was a historical switch or perhaps I ought to consider what that means for the present moment.
You don't have to. There's a lot going on. I'm not going to force that upon you. But I do think the engineering shift makes a lot of sense. Kind of thinking about what that must have been like for you when you were making that decision and what people might have been saying, right? About like, oh, why would you do children's literature, the book things, instead of the money falling from the sky career that is engineering? You know, so I get that. So listeners, I'm going to throw this out to you all. These are things that have kind of been bringing us comfort and I guess will continue to bring us comfort. But I would be curious to hear the kinds of things that you all are listening to, reading, watching, you know, that are bringing you comfort, right? Be it in this time or in general. Because I think it's always good to stock up on things that bring you joy. Like, I'm not so much of I put on this TV show because I love this TV show and I'm going to watch it over and over again kind of a person. Like, I know people love, for example, Friends, right? And Friends will be a cozy watch. But I'd be curious kind of what people have going on that brings them comfort from the pop culture that they love over the course of their lives.
Yeah, like when you have to dig in and get ready for a long time ahead, what is it that you go back to?
Yeah. You can let us know on all of our social media. You just look up Sex Love Lit Podcast and we'll be there. We're on Tumblr. We're on Instagram. We have a website that exists. You can find us there. I think we're thinking about a Blue Sky, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe by the time we post this, we'll probably have a Blue Sky.
Okay. Well, then you can find us on Blue Sky too at Sex Love Lit Podcast. Because we'll just keep running with that, keep it the same. Do we want to talk about some things that we have coming up next? Or do we just kind of want to leave the vibes cozy and not put stress on ourselves about the future?
Let's keep it cozy, I think.
Okay.
But you can see what's coming up on our various socials.
Yeah, and we hope that you'll come hang out with us when those episodes go live. This has been a, we hope, warm hug of an episode of Sex Love Literature. We love your faces, and we'll see you next time. Bye.